I am very lucky in terms of being the managing director. I am not the best accountant, I'm not the best salesman, I am not the best marketeer. I have experts in all of those fields, and I consider myself to be like the coach of a rugby team or the conductor of an orchestra. I can hear when the woodwind or the brass section are out of tune, and as the conductor it's my job to make sure they come together and everything works as it should do. And in terms of the music that the orchestra plays, it's sweet, it's in tune, and that's the job that I have as managing director.
British Gibraltar was born in 1704 due to the rock's strategic importance and its value to the Royal Navy, for many years the most powerful navy in the world. The force's strong presence in Gibraltar over the years encouraged growth in certain areas of business, and it's little surprise that one such area was the supply of beer, wines, spirits and tobacco. Today, Saccone Speed is a powerhouse, servicing our bars, restaurants, hotels, supermarkets and convenience stores. But it started from humble beginnings some 175 years ago.
In the early days, the business revolved particularly around supplying the Navy. There was a military presence in many parts of the world, and so Saccone Speed went to wherever the Navy went. With the downgrading of the military in Gibraltar and elsewhere, and particularly in the Mediterranean, so the business started to contract.
The business was founded in 1893 by an Englishman, James Andrew Speed, who came to Gibraltar from Castle Carey in Somerset. He considered himself to be a grocer. That was the main business when it was set up initially in 11 Irish Town, and he later on developed into the wines and spirits business. Jerome Saccone, he formed his independent business in 1850, and he arrived in Gibraltar shortly before that, and he considered himself first and foremost to be a private banker, as well secondary as a grocer and a wine merchant. They were competitors. They were both based in the same part of Gibraltar, in the Irish Town area, and subsequently in what is now Main Street. And while Speed was very much involved with the Royal Navy, the British Royal Navy and British shipping industry, Saccone's strength was predominantly with the US fleet. As often happens, a few years later in 1908, both businesses realised the strength of amalgamation. They were already the major wines and spirits players in the Gibraltar market. They were both seen and realised the opportunities for expansion outside of Gibraltar, predominantly where the Royal Navy were throughout the world, and the business amalgamated, and it was incorporated in UK, and with effect from 1908, Saccone and Speed was born. The war generated exceptional profits for the business, despite the challenges that were brought in terms of the stocks which were supplied to the British Royal Navy. Crisis hit the company in 1926 with the death of Joseph Armand Paton, which left James Andrew Speed as the only surviving director of the amalgamation.
The family relationship began in the late 1920s. My grandfather was born in Greece because his father was working for Cable and Wireless, laying cables through the Mediterranean. And he came to Gibraltar because of the estate of the Baglietto family, which was my great-grandmother. And he came to Gibraltar originally to close the business down, but when he saw what the business was, he fell in love with it and decided to continue the business. So he worked in the Baglietto business for a while, and eventually the company merged with Saccone and Speed in the late 30s, and my grandfather became joint managing director of the joint operation.
During the Second World War years, trade was good and not so good for the business in terms of they had a virtual monopoly in army messes and on naval warships. One of the problems obviously was many of the staff in the various branches, particularly in England and eventually in Edinburgh and Glasgow, were conscripted into the Royal Navy, which left a particular problem, and much stock was destroyed by air raids and bombing. In Gibraltar in 1942, business was good. The build-up of the garrison was happening in terms of just prior to the North African campaign, and in 1943, Major Patron, managing director, reported that the company was in a very strong position. During the 1950s and 60s, business was strong in London, Gibraltar and Morocco, and also there was growth in East Africa and in Malta, and the business had a number of agents in India, in Egypt and in New York.
The 1960s saw two major changes for Saccone and Speed. The first was that it was acquired by Courage plc, which are the UK brewers, and Saccone and Speed became Courage's wine and spirits division, but not the spirits division purely for Gibraltar, but also for the majority of the UK, because Saccone and Speed had a presence in London, Edinburgh, and all the major ports, because obviously their main supply at the time their main principle was to supply the Royal Navy. In addition to that, they also had offices and branches distributed across the Mediterranean and primarily in Malta and Tangiers. The other major change that happened was that in the late 1960s, Saccone and Speed acquired Charles Gajur and Company Limited, who were the franchised Coca-Cola bottlers and also the owners of Charles Gajur Builders Merchants.
Interestingly enough, Coca-Cola was not a product that was manufactured by Saccone and Speed, and we have to look at one of our other companies, which is Charles Gajur and Company Limited, and it was Charles Gajur who had the great idea of speaking to Coke and trying to get Coca-Cola bottled in Gibraltar, and this dates all the way back to 1949, and we're very proud of the fact that we are the first European bottler outside of Great Britain.
Here in the middle of the 19th century, the population has increased considerably in numbers, as you can see. Finally, Spain by now, by the middle of the 19th century, has recovered second place. Genoese and Jews still constant there. But then in 1878, we have a new element enters. That green column there represents Maltese. The last census we have for Gibraltar is 1931, just before the Second World War, and it's a much simplified thing, but you can see by now the population is increased considerably. You've got nearly 14,000 actually natives of Gibraltar, much larger than the other columns, which were Spanish, British, Malta, and others.
And in 1908 they amalgamated, and that was when James Andrew Speed and Jerome Saccone joined together and became one trading business. Firstly in the UK, in all major naval garrison towns, in Chatham, in Devonport, in Rosyth, in Plymouth, wherever there was a Royal Navy strength, they set up a branch, and that became very successful, and they were the major suppliers to the Royal Navy. They realised obviously that there was potential in other parts of the world, so branches were set up in Malta, in Malaga, in Bombay, and in New York. And the company held many royal warrants, including from King Alfonso VIII of Spain, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, and Gotha, the Duke of Edinburgh. We bottled beer here in Gibraltar. We had an association with the UK brewery. Beer was bought here in bulk and bottled actually in this building in the 1920s and 1930s. And basically the end of it all was that Saccone and Speed was bought by Courage. We were the wines and spirits division. We've had some very famous Gibraltarian names on the board of directors involved with the company. John McIntosh was a director and chairman for a short period of time. Sir Edward Cottrell, obviously, Joseph Patron, lots of local involvement with the business. And today still we have a Cottrell on the board.
Then, at a later date, as the business expanded, my father started working for Saccone & Speed in London, and following the buyout by Courage, my father was then contracted to come back to Gibraltar and work for Saccone & Speed over here. So after my grandfather being the chairman of the business, eventually my father became the chairman of the business, and I started working here in 1988. And hopefully another generation of the family will work for the business at some stage in the future.
The late 1960s obviously saw the closure of the frontier, and with that the whole economic model that Saccone & Speed enjoyed for Gibraltar changed. It had primarily relied upon visitations by the Royal Navy, by shipping vessels, and also from visitation of tourists from Spain, but that all ceased. As a consequence, Saccone Speed had to look at its business model, and what it decided that instead of just being purely a wholesaler and a retailer, that it would also concentrate on the supply of beverages to the clubs, bars, restaurants and hotels in Gibraltar, and that is something that we carry on doing till this day.
Gibraltar is a wonderful place to live, to work, and particularly when you have a young family. There's a very good family support network in Gibraltar. You have a lot of close friends and family nearby you, which gives you tremendous support in the home. And as a company, it's nice for us to be able to offer things back to the community by way of support to various sporting associations and charities, but also from a business point of view to contribute to the local economy for the betterment of everybody.
What also helps us is with our links with Coca-Cola UK, we've been able to do quite a number of things to help community in Gibraltar in sports and social and cultural affairs. And I think people still remember that we were able to take people to the Olympics last year, where 8 people watched a basketball match in the Olympics, and we had 2 of our deserving young athletes carrying the Olympic torch around the streets of London.
Because of the size and the nature of the market, we sell to most areas in terms of supermarkets and bars and restaurants, and we feel we have a commitment to the Gibraltar community in terms of all of the students passing through school at a certain age will come and visit our bottling line. In terms of sponsorship, we are always keen to help sporting associations with a new football strip or with some funds to sponsor a football match or basketball or swimming. We are the major sponsors of the Gibraltar Special Olympics team, and we feel we are very much part of the community. That is not a new thing for Saccone Speed. It's been this way for many years, and we consider it ourselves as a major player in this Gibraltar market.
Our philosophy has been over the years to give back to the community, and what we have done is we always have in the background sponsored sporting events and social events. So we always strongly support sporting clubs, the Football Association, the Basketball Association, the Dance Association, and a lot of the sporting institutions. What we have in recent years is we've been looking at other areas that we could support, and we are a sponsor, one of the first sponsors of the Gibraltar International Chess Tournament, and in addition to that we have in recent years been one of the sponsors of the Philharmonic Society. So obviously it's not just sports but more the culture side to it as well.
Well, certainly the world is moving on very quickly nowadays. I think that 30 years ago the pace of life, business life and life in general, was a lot slower. As the world has developed and communications have developed, and the internet and other social networks, so the challenges to the business have grown with it, and you can't afford to stay still in this world. So and online advertising, online selling is becoming an ever more effective way of doing business, and we have to keep up with the way the world is moving on. If you stand still, you get overtaken in this world nowadays.
I think the history of Gibraltar is forged in times of adversity. Initially we had the seizures, the military seizures by sea by the Kingdom of Spain, and then subsequently during the time of General Franco, when he closed the border, we had a financial and economic siege where they tried to completely suffocate Gibraltar and its people and its economy by blocking all access through the border, so that our own historical makeup is one which has been forged through times of adversity, that we know of our resilience because it's been comprised during those times. And I think the fact that businesses as well can survive a closed border, and the businesses will today survive an effective, sometimes blockade of the border when they have a 3 or 4 hour queue, which I'm sure we will survive and will come out on top, shows that it's not just Gibraltarian people that are strong and made of stern stuff, but also the businesses that comprise the Gibraltar economy.
And we actually celebrate the 175th anniversary of Saccone and Speed in 2014. We also, that same year, will celebrate being Coca-Cola bottlers for 65 years, which is quite a track record, and certainly before anybody else in Europe outside of Great Britain.
How many Coca-Colas have you enjoyed over the years? Many of them will have been bottled by the Saccone and Speed Group, and now we know a little bit more about this local company which keeps the refreshments flowing and, of course, the people behind the brand. Join us next week when we take a close look at another quintessentially Gibraltarian business with real heritage.